Hello, dear friends, um, my students, and the members of the fraternity of physiology and medicine. Today's topic for this video is about the excitability of the cells and the tissues in the body. Now, before I start the topic, I would like to say a few things. First is this video is coming after a long gap. That's because, as I mentioned previously, I've been preoccupied with the university work and plus the renovation work that's going on in the studio. But now it will come regularly. Now, the second point, before we actually start with the video, I just wanted to address two issues which were raised by a few members of, 2 or 3 members of the subscriber community or family, as I like to call it. First is, 1 or 2 students have mentioned that why do I speak so slow in these lectures? Well, yes, I agree partly that it's slow, but it is deliberate. Let me tell you that the slowness of the lecture and slowness of my speech is quite deliberate. And that's because, these videos are watched world over by a range of, a vast range of the students of medicine. That is, on one end of the spectrum, we have the students who may be listening to the concepts for the first time. The words, the phrases, the concepts, they may be coming to the students for the first time. There may be few students like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, there may be professors of the subject, professors of other subjects who might want to just revise a particular topic. And therefore, while addressing such a vast range of the audience, I thought it would be prudent on my part to go a little slow so that at least the first time listeners, the beginners, the first prof students would be able to catch up with the concept at a proper speed. We always have the option of pausing the video or rewinding it and looking at it once again. And those who find it a little slow can always kind of increase the speed of the video, make it 2x or even greater than that. So that option is there. And therefore, I thought it would be great to go slow. That's one issue which I wanted to address. And the other one is the name of the channel and putting up the word sir in that. Well, of course, I just wanted to clarify because 1 or 2 students have raised even this issue. How can you put sir in your name or name of the channel? Now, first of all, it's not with some kind of a reverence that this sir has been put here. It's not before the name, but it's after the name. So it's not a knighthood or a reverence which is anticipated here. But, particularly in the Indian context, the teachers are always fondly referred to as sir or madam. And therefore, it kind of becomes a usual name with which a person is referred to. And therefore, since 5-6 years ago, I started this channel, I started this particular concept of Vivek Sir's physiology. Therefore, I thought the way I am referred to by thousands and thousands of students, I would keep it the same way. And therefore, that's sir. It's not with some kind of an anticipation of respect or reverence or knighthood, just wanted to address that. Anyways, let's put that apart. And now, let's start with the physiology. This video is on excitability of the various tissues in the body and the terms which are used in the context of excitability. So, let's begin with the very basics. First thing is, a stimulus is applied to the tissue, to any tissue. What is a stimulus? A stimulus is the change in the external environment. And as a result of that, the tissue excites. So, what kind of stimulus are we looking at? What are the various stimuli which can be applied? Stimuli may be electrical, chemical, physical, mechanical, lots of stimuli. But generally, for the experimental purposes, we use electrical stimuli. An electrical stimulus is applied to the tissue, to the various tissues, and then their excitation is studied. The topic for today is excitation or excitability. Now, excitable cells, not all cells are excitable. Excitable cells are those whose membrane show excitation. The membranes exhibit the property of excitability after the application of a stimulus. So, it's the membrane excitation. And basically there are two tissues which are excitable tissues, the nerve and the muscle. The nerve excites, the nerve membrane excites in order to send signal to another nerve or to a muscle. Then as the muscle excites, it will result in the muscle contraction. So, apart from that, of course, there are many other tissues in the body whose membranes are excitable. We will see that in the due course of the lecture. Apart from nerve and muscle, there are various other cell types which show the property of excitability. For instance, hair cell in the labyrinth or pancreatic beta cell. It's an excitable cell, its membrane excites, and as a result of that, eventually there would be release of insulin by the beta cell. So, apart from nerve and muscle, there are other cells or cell types which are excitable. Well, now let us first divide this topic into two parts. Let me first talk about the stimulus which is applied and its properties, and then the second part would be the membrane excitation. So, what happens with the when the membrane excites, what happens to the cell? Right. So, the first is stimulus. As I mentioned, there are various types of stimuli, but the one which we use is the electrical stimulus because it's quite similar in properties to the impulse that to the signals or impulses that flow through our nerves, quite similar, and therefore electrical stimulus is the one which we often employ or use to excite the cells. So, the point is, not any stimulus can excite a tissue. Not any stimulus of any strength can excite the tissue, and therefore what we need to understand is that what is it in the stimulus that will lead to excitation of the tissue. I mean, what are the properties of the stimulus that you have to know? So, basically the properties that we are looking at, I mean, a stimulus has two properties. That's the real first point for today's lecture. A stimulus, an electrical stimulus, has two properties: the strength and the duration. The strength of the stimulus and the duration for which it is applied to a tissue. These two are the properties of a stimulus, and actually a stimulus is an interplay of these two properties: the strength of the stimulus and for how long it is applied to the tissue. So, remember, whether a stimulus will excite the tissue or not will depend on these two properties: the strength and the duration, time duration for which the stimulus is applied. So, let us look at these properties one by one. First, strength of the stimulus. It should be clearly understood that whatever strength is applied to a tissue, whether it's a natural stimulus like a touch to the skin, a natural stimulus, or experimental stimulus like electrical excitation of the tissue, the stimulus should have this one property, that it should be a rapidly rising strength of the stimulus. Strength of the stimulus should be a rapidly rising strength. of the stimulus. Only then the stimulus will excite the tissue. Let's just try to understand this particular point with the help of a diagrammatic representation. Let's say that a stimulus, we can show it diagrammatically. On this axis we have time duration for which the stimulus is applied, and on this axis we have strength of the stimulus. So let's show it diagrammatically. A rapidly rising strength like this and reaches its peak and stays at the peak and then becomes zero. This kind of stimulus is said to be the best stimulus that will excite a tissue. You can see here rapidly rising strength of the stimulus. It reached the peak and it remained at that strength for some duration and then becomes zero. So this is said to be a rectangular pulse. Because of its appearance like this, it's called as the rectangular pulse. The stimulus referred to as the rectangular pulse. This is the duration of the stimulus, and on the vertical axis we have strength, but what you can see is the rapidly rising strength. That's the characteristic. I mean, if I were to compare this with another stimulus like this, let's say this is another type of a stimulus. What do you see here? Well, even in this second case here, the strength has increased and it has become this much strength, but it has increased slowly. It's a slowly rising stimulus strength, and this is not a good stimulus. Okay, why this is not a good stimulus? Because stimulus strength is slowly rising. Therefore, what will happen is the sodium channel opening by a positive feedback, which is going to cause the excitation of the membrane. That sodium channel opening will be very, very slow. And therefore, for a membrane to generate spike, to complete the depolarization, to complete that action potential, what is necessary is we need the tissue to reach the threshold, and at threshold there should be a critical number of sodium channels should be open. A critical number of sodium channels should be available, so that a massive influx, available means open actually I mean to say, so that a massive influx of sodium can occur at one instance in an explosive fashion, and that can excite the membrane completely. So when is that possible? When the stimulus strength is a rapidly rising strength. Stimulus is of rapidly rising strength like this. You can see here that even in the second case, the stimulus has increased and the strength has reached quite a good strength the stimulus could reach, but it was a slowly rising stimulus, and therefore please remember why I have shown a discard for this stimulus is because this kind of stimulus, if you apply, it will result in membrane accommodation. It results in what is called as membrane accommodation, meaning that the membrane will reach threshold and even cross the threshold, but will fail to excite. Because, now look at the reason. Because of the slowly rising strength of the stimulus, what happens is sodium channel opening is very, very slow, and therefore you never get one critical number of sodium channels which can cause a massive influx of sodium, and that will result in spike. That will never happen if the stimulus is like this. So therefore the first point is that stimulus intensity should be rapidly rising, and from that point of view, as I mentioned, rectangular pulse is said to be the best type of stimulus. The stimulus strength has increased very rapidly. It has reached peak. As I mentioned, this is the strength of the stimulus. On this axis, we have duration of the for which the stimulus was applied, and this is the best stimulus. Now, the second best stimulus is exponential pulse. Exponential pulse. What do I mean by that? Okay, here is a stimulus which instantly increases in strength and reaches peak. You can see here strength on the vertical axis, and then it declines over a period of time. Exponentially declines. Now you can see in the second type of the stimulus, it has declined exponentially, but giving us a good amount of time duration for which the stimulus was applied to the tissue. So this, the second one, which is called as exponential pulse, is also a good type of stimulus, but the second best. It is the second best. The best one, of course, is called as the rectangular pulse because of its appearance in the diagram like a rectangle. In reality, we are talking about the stimulus. So it's applied, its intensity instantly reaches peak and stays at the peak intensity. I mean, stimulus is being applied, the peak will stay, that stimulus strength will continue for some time, and then we will immediately remove it and it becomes zero. So that diagrammatically it will appear like a rectangular pulse, right? So that's about the stimulus, and it's the, as I mentioned, it's the interplay of two properties: strength of the stimulus and for how long it is being applied to the tissue, that will determine whether a tissue will excite or not. Now, going back to our discussion on the excitability, we've seen so far strength of the stimulus, it should be rapidly rising. If you apply a slowly rising stimulus intensity, it will cause membrane accommodation, and membrane accommodation means threshold will be crossed and yet the tissue will not excite. Then the duration of the stimulus, for how long it should be applied, it should be an optimum duration. I mean, let's have one more diagrammatic view. Let's say I apply a stimulus and it appears like this. It is another type of stimulus. You can see here that vertical axis, of course, strength, and this is the duration. Stimulus intensity is good. It has increased rapidly, so that requirement is fulfilled. Rapidly rising stimulus strength, but look at the duration, hardly any. This also probably would fail to excite the tissue because duration. Look, there is hardly any duration for which the stimulus was applied. That will not. I mean, if you apply a stimulus even naturally, it has to have certain duration. Only then there will be excitation of the membrane. So that's very clear that duration should be optimum. Right. So let's go back from where we started the discussion: strength and duration. So in case of an electrical stimulus, based on these two properties, there are two definitions in the experimental physiology which we need to understand. First definition is Rheobase, the term coined by Lapik. Rheobase is about the strength of a stimulus. It says Rheobase means the weakest strength of the stimulus that can bring about an excitation of the tissue. The minimum strength of the stimulus that can be applied for infinite duration. I mean, duration is of no concern right now when we are talking about the rheobase strength of the stimulus. We just want to see what is the minimal strength of the stimulus that can excite this particular tissue. We are just interested in having a look at that. Not interested in duration right now, okay, in this particular definition. So, what is the minimum strength that can excite the tissue? That minimal strength of the stimulus, the weakest strength, that is called as rheobase. It could be applied for any length of time. Time no issue, time no matter. It could be applied for any length. If it is able to excite the tissue, then that minimal strength of the stimulus would be called as rheobase strength. Well, in practice, the weakest stimulus that brings about a response is actually called as the threshold stimulus. Generally speaking, in practical terms, it's called as threshold stimulus or liminal stimulus. I mean, any stimulus strength which is below that, less than that, would be called as subliminal strength of the stimulus, and that will not excite the tissue at all. So, liminal and subliminal, these terms are very commonly used in practical terms. Now, coming to the to this definition, look, rheobase is not a very convenient tool to measure the excitability of a tissue. Now we are talking, okay, now we have come to the core of this concept. So, listen to this part carefully. We are looking at the excitability of a tissue. We will also like to compare the excitabilities of different tissues. Say for instance, nerve and muscle. These are the two excitable tissues. We would like to compare which one is more excitable, nerve or muscle. Now, if you want to compare this, there should be some parameter for comparison. There should be some yardstick, some benchmark to compare the nerve and muscle. How is that possible? Okay, so we want to have that parameter. Could the rheobase be that parameter? We want to just compare the excitabilities of the two tissues. Rheobase is not a convenient tool to measure the excitability. You know why? Because as we have mentioned, rheobase is the minimal strength of the tissue, minimal strength of the stimulus that excites a tissue. So, minimal strength, and that could be applied to the tissue for whatever length of time. It could be infinite time, but if it excites the tissue, then we call it rheobase strength, minimal strength. So, why it's not a convenient tool is simply because you apply rheobase strength to a tissue, and then you have to wait, because as we said, it's a minimal strength of the stimulus. So, you will have to apply that stimulus for a long duration. Long duration. You don't know how long the duration would be. So, therefore, that's not a very convenient tool, convenient way of expressing, experimentally it's not practical to use that term. And therefore, instead of rheobase as taking the tool for measurement of the excitability, we will use another term, and that is Chronax-C. The other term which actually we are interested in is the Chronax-C. Yes. Now, first thing, as I mentioned just now, rheobase is not a convenient tool to measure the excitability. Therefore, what we actually do is, we will make double the rheobase strength of the stimulus. We will select the stimulus of double the rheobase strength, 2 into rheobase, and that stimulus will be applied to the tissue. Okay, because rheobase strength, if you apply to the tissue, it would have taken a long time to excite. we are measuring the excitation and excitability of the tissue. Then we will have to wait for long durations. So instead what we are doing is double the Rho base strength is applied to a tissue, and then we are looking at the time taken by the tissue to excite. That time taken by the tissue to excite, when the stimulus strength is double the Rho base, that time is called as Cronach C. Okay, so let me just revise it once again, and let me also say where the students falter. Cronach C is the time taken by the tissue to excite when the stimulus strength is double the Rho base. Okay, so Cronach C is the time. Very often when I ask the definition of Cronach C to the students, they immediately, instantaneously or instinctively say Cronach C, yes, it is double the Rho base, 2 into Rho base. No, Cronach C is not 2 into Rho base. Cronach C is not double the Rho base. Okay, there a student falters. Cronach C is the time taken by the tissue to excite when we apply double the Rho base strength current or stimulus. Okay, when you say Cronach C is double the Rho base, means you are saying Cronach C is also the current strength or stimulus strength. So that's not the case. Please remember, therefore, Cronach C is the time, Rho base is the stimulus strength. These two are different properties of a stimulus. We have said strength and duration. So strength and duration are the two properties we are dealing with, and strength is measured in terms of Rho base and multiples of Rho base, and duration is measured as Cronach C. Right. Well, there is one more definition which is used, but I mean it's there, but in practical terms it's not used. Utilization time. Utilization time is the time taken by the tissue to excite when stimulus strength is single Rho base. Okay, we will apply Rho base strength stimulus, and the time taken by the tissue to excite would be called as utilization time. But of course, we are not interested in this particular definition during the experimental physiology, because as I said, it would take long time. If you apply the minimal stimulus, minimal strength or Rho base strength stimulus, it would take long time for the tissue to excite, and we will have to wait that much long time. So it's not practical, and therefore we are not interested in this definition, utilization time. When single Rho base strength stimulus is applied, we are interested in Cronach C, when double the Rho base strength stimulus is applied and then time taken by the tissue to excite is measured. Okay, and therefore it goes without saying that first thing, of course, Cronach C is the real measure of excitability. That's the today's topic. We are talking about excitability of the tissues, and Cronach C is the measure of excitability of the tissue, of any tissue. So what I mean here is, shorter the Cronach C, now listen to this part carefully, shorter the Cronach C, more excitable will be a tissue. Do you get the point? Shorter the Cronach C, more excitable will be a tissue. You know why? Now it's quite obvious, of course. Shorter the Cronach C means it takes less time to excite, and that means it is more excitable. It is exciting in lesser duration, it takes less time to excite, means it excites quickly, that means it is more excitable. Okay, so therefore shorter the Cronach C, more excitable will be the tissue, because that means it excites in shorter duration. So please understand this, these terms, these terminologies, and what do they actually mean. Yeah, so that's one. Of course, what is the response in experimental studies? I have been saying this in this video, that the tissue responds, tissue excites. So what do you take as the response by the tissue? What do you take as the excitation by the tissue, or what do you say? When do you say that the tissue is responding? Generally, in experimental physiology, it is taken as the muscle contraction. When we are studying the chronaxis of various tissues, the response by the tissue when you apply stimulus, that response is taken in the form of muscle contraction. That is taken as the response. So here we have applied the stimulus, and response obtained would be in the form of muscle contraction, and then we can measure that time duration. So response in the experimental studies is generally taken as the muscle contraction. So these were the definitions, chronaxy and utilization time, of course, which we have already mentioned. Now coming to the strength duration curve, can we graphically record all these terms, or the strength and the duration and all? Yes, we can have we can obtain a graphic record, we can obtain a graph, and in experimental physiology it's called as strength duration curve. It's called as strength duration curve. So again, we have been talking about the strength of the stimulus and time taken by the tissue to excite, that's duration, and therefore that relationship is taken as strength duration curve. So here we are, on the horizontal axis we will have duration, and on the vertical axis we have strength of the stimulus, right. So first of all, some graphs are obtained. For example, graph of an action potential, it is obtained. We apply the stimulus and a nerve excites at one point, and that is obtained by the CRO, cathode ray oscilloscope. This is not an obtained graph, this is a plotted graph. I mean, we are going to select the various strengths of the stimulus. We are going to apply to the tissue those strengths, and we will see how long the tissue took to excite. Okay, and then we will plot the graph accordingly. So that's the strength duration curve. Let's say we have taken Rheobase strength of the stimulus. Then how long will it have to be passed through the tissue when the tissue actually excites? That we will have to find out. So on this axis we have duration. We will see that a tissue has taken certain duration to excite. I mean, we had to apply that stimulus for certain amount of time, certain duration. Okay, and finally the tissue excited. So we will plot it here. We'll mark it on the duration axis. Let's say let's take the arbitrary units 1, 2, 4, something like that. These are just arbitrary units. So Rheobase strength applied, and then it was applied for this much duration, and the tissue was excited finally. At this duration the tissue has showed excitation. Then we will apply double the Rheobase strength. So 2R, double the Rheobase strength is applied, and then we will see how much time is taken by the tissue to excite. We will plot that also. So you can see now when we applied 2 into Rho base strength, then the tissue has taken shorter duration to excite. You can see here on this axis there is duration here. So tissue was excited at this duration only, at let's say 1 unit time. So that has been plotted here. That point has been marked. This is how we can select various strengths of the stimuli, and we go on applying and then we see how much duration was taken by the tissue to excite. That duration is marked. So for a single Rho base strength, this much was the duration. We marked it here. Then double the Rho base strength was applied. Then in quick duration, you can see here, in no time the tissue was excited. So we have marked that duration. And then when we join all these points, we get the so-called, why so-called? It's called normally as a strength duration curve. So this is it typically appearing strength duration curve. We have joined those points, okay, that has given us that those, when we joined those points, we obtained this strength duration curve. So that's the first point. As you can see, Rho base strength applied, and this was the time taken by the tissue. 4 units was the time taken by the tissue to excite. When we applied double the Rho base strength, this was the duration, time taken by the tissue to excite. So time taken by the tissue to excite when the current strength, stimulus strength was double the Rho base, that time is called as chronaxy. So naturally this is the chronaxy in the graph, this time duration. This is the chronaxy in the graph, and we can say this is the utilization time when single Rho base strength was applied and it took this much time to excite. This much time. It excited at this time. So this will be called as utilization time, this one, this duration. So that's how we can plot that strength duration curve. This is the chronaxy, time taken by the tissue to excite when stimulus strength was double the Rho base. Right. I'm going to finally talk about shift of this curve to the right. Well, yes, that does happen. Shift of the strength duration curve to the right. It does happen. But before that, I need to just add a few more points in this. How do we obtain the strength duration curve? A small stimulating electrode is placed over the motor point. What is the motor point? Motor point, actually it's on the skin, but it is said to be that point, I mean electrode is placed on the skin, but it's said to be that point where the motor nerve just enters the muscle, a particular muscle. That's called as the motor point. So a small stimulating electrode is placed over the motor point. It is the point of on the skin which is closest, which is actually closest to the point where the motor nerve enters the muscle. Naturally, it's inside, it's not on the skin where motor nerve is entering the muscle. Muscle is deep. So we are calling it as a point closest to that point where the motor nerve is entering the muscle. So that's called as a motor point, and that's where we place one electrode. Another electrode, which is called as indifferent electrode, is placed at a certain distance from that first electrode. So we have 2 electrodes applied to the skin, one at the motor point and the other one is at a distance, and then square pulses of current of the duration 0.001, 0.1, 1, 10 and 100 milliseconds. So we are going to apply the square pulses. We have seen the rectangular pulse some time back. we will apply square pulses. This is how it is described because it appears diagrammatically like that. Remember the rectangular pulse? So now we apply these pulses of the durations of these milliseconds, 0.01, then 0.1, 1, 10 and 100 milliseconds are applied through these electrodes. And the minimal strength that would elicit the muscle contraction, that is noted. What is the minimal strength that actually led to muscle contraction? That strength is noted, and that's Rheobase strength, as we have as we already said. Then we will so because we have selected, we are going to select different strengths and we are going to apply them for different durations, and that is how we will then plot that. Okay, I applied current strength, which is Rheobase strength, and the tissue took this much time to excite. Then double the Rheobase strength applied, this much time was taken to excite. This is how we will obtain those points on the strength duration curve, and that's how it will be plotted. So, and we will, it's actually observed that results plotted as a strength duration curve for the most excitable fibers in the motor nerve. I'll explain this further as well. So, that's how strength duration curve can be plotted. Now, second thing, chronaxy is the measure of excitability of the tissue. We have already mentioned that. Shorter the chronaxy, more excitable is the tissue because it takes lesser time to excite. Already we have discussed about it. Chronaxy depends on what? I mean, whether a fiber, nerve fiber or muscle fiber is less or more excitable depends on what? Generally, primarily, the excitability or chronaxy depends on density of voltage gated sodium channels. You know, a nerve or a muscle or most of the excitable tissues or cells we are talking about, their membranes excite because of the sodium influx through the fast voltage gated fast sodium channels. So, primarily the density of these channels would determine the chronaxy or excitability of a tissue. Naturally, because more the channels, greater would be the chance or speed of influx of sodium. I will take that at some other time, the sodium channels, the variety of sodium channels which are located at different places. That will be another video. Okay, then adults have shorter chronaxes generally than the infants and children. Nerves have shorter chronaxes than muscles. I mean, if I were to just place the order of chronaxes, I mean place the tissues in the order of their chronaxes, it would be something like this. As I said, nerve will have shorter chronaxy, and in that also myelinated nerve will be more excitable compared to unmyelinated nerve. That's quite obvious because myelinated nerve, and with a larger diameter of the myelinated nerve, there would be less of exoplasmic resistance. So, for the flow of ions, there would be a lesser resistance. It's more excitable in that sense, myelinated nerve, than the unmyelinated nerve. So, shortest chronaxy would that be of myelinated nerve, followed by unmyelinated nerve. Then we have skeletal muscle, then we have cardiac muscle, and finally the smooth muscle. So, first point that you have noted is shortest to longest. This is the order of shortest chronaxy to longest chronaxy. Okay, that's the first part. And nerves have shorter chronaxes than the muscles. That also has been noted. So, smooth muscle has the longest chronaxy. Cardiac and smooth muscles have very close. They are very close in their chronaxes, the time taken by them to excite. However, This is the shortest chronaxis, means most excitable, and on this side we have the longest chronaxis represented by cardiac and smooth muscles. So that can very well be used as the understanding of their excitabilities. Then pale fibers have shorter chronaxis than red fibers. The pale or white fibers are little more excitable compared to the red fibers, which generate ATPs by oxidative phosphorylation. So this is some of the comparison. Now chronaxis of a tissue is affected by certain factors. So let's understand those factors. Temperature. Heat decreases the chronaxis and cold increases the chronaxis. So for instance, heat, increased temperature, and of course this is within physiological limits. Let's understand that. That's within physiological limits. Heat or increased temperature would shorten the chronaxis. So if an athlete who is performing some kind of or taking part in some 100-meter sprint or 400 meters dash, then if it's in the season of heat and if is the season of cold, the performance may slightly vary because excitabilities are getting affected. Excitability of the nerve, excitability of the muscle, and therefore contraction and contractility of the muscle. So heat would make it more excitable because then because of the increased temperature, the channel gating kinetics, please understand this, the channels have got gates and the gates have certain gating kinetics, how fast or slow, how rapidly or slowly they open and close. So heat and cold have the influence on that. Drugs that influence the neuromuscular transmission, and the third factor is condition of the tissue, such as injury or degeneration would alter the chronaxis. So next point is effect of injury on the excitability. What is the effect of injury? And as I mentioned, I'll just quickly talk about the shift of the strength duration curve to the right. Let's say here is a motor nerve trunk, and here is the skeletal muscle which is innervated by this motor nerve. These are the nerve fibers. These are the nerve fibers which are innervating the muscle fibers in the muscle. Just a representative diagram. And let's say here is a strength duration curve for this motor nerve. We have already obtained this strength duration curve, and that's for the motor nerve trunk as such. Now this motor nerve is injured. The point that I am trying to make here is effect of injury on the chronaxis and on the strength duration curve. Now let's assume that there was a partial injury to this motor nerve trunk. There was a transection of this nerve trunk. So some fibers have been cut and they are going to degenerate, and only a few fibers are still existing. What happens now is, if you apply the stimulus to this motor nerve trunk, we are studying the excitability, so we are applying the stimulus. What happens is, some of the fibers have got degenerated by the injury. This is the injuries. These fibers are gone, degenerated. Only one or two fibers are remaining in the diagram. This is just a diagrammatic presentation. So only these motor neurons will excite, and only a few muscle fibers will respond by contraction. So strength duration curve will alter, and I'll tell you how it alters. in fact, to understand it, let's assume that the motor nerve trunk was completely injured. There was a complete transection of this motor nerve trunk. So what will, and the fibers are degenerated. So what now happens is, if you apply the stimulus to this motor nerve trunk, the nerve fibers have been degenerated. There will be no response obtained. There will be no muscle contraction that can be seen. In that case, what next step is taken is, we will apply the stimulating electrode directly to the muscle, right? Motor nerve trunk has been injured and the motor neurons, all of them in this nerve have been degenerated, gone. They are unable to show any response. So what next? I mean, the next step is, we apply the stimulating electrode directly to the muscle. Well, muscle fibers are still intact, so they are going to respond. They will respond, they will excite, and they will show contraction. So now same thing, we will again plot on the strength duration curve. So here is a Riobase strength applied, double Riobase strength, 3 Riobase, like that. This time what is going to happen is, remember I mentioned some time back that muscles have a longer chronaxy. Nerves have shorter chronaxy, muscles have a longer chronaxy. So now what is going to happen is, double the Riobase strength was applied directly to the muscle. It took longer time to excite. See, on this axis we have duration. So when this strength was applied, this strength of the stimulus was applied, the muscle, normally the graph was at this point. See, these were the points obtained previously. This was the normal graph. Now, with the direct stimulation of the muscle and muscle having a longer chronaxy, this is the chronaxy, muscle having a longer chronaxy, so now we will get the points like this. And when you join the points, the graph will appear like this. Let's plot it correctly. It means the strength duration curve will shift. This was the normal strength duration curve with motor nerve intact, and this is obtained when the motor nerve was injured and fibers were degenerated. The curve has shifted to the right. So that's how we can interpret that all the motor neurons have been degenerated, that the curve shifted to the right. Right. Chronaxy is also increased in certain conditions like tetany that happens from hypoparathyroidism. And the last point that I want to make is very important, hypothetically very important. I mean, it has been hypothesized which cell or which tissue type is most excitable. And we saw it some time back that apart from nerve and muscle are obviously the excitable tissues. They serve a certain purpose. But apart from that, there are some more cells which are excitable. I mentioned one, which is pancreatic beta cell, because pancreatic beta cell, when there is blood glucose, in response to that increase in blood glucose, it's going to release the insulin. So how it happens? Glucose enters the cell, it undergoes glycolysis. That glycolysis will generate the ATPs, and the ATPs will cause closure of ATP sensitive potassium channels. This is a matter of discussion for some other time, so I am going through it very rapidly. Just want to tell you about the membrane excitation of this pancreatic beta cell. So ATP sensitive potassium channel closes, and therefore potassium which was supposed to go out through these channels will now just accumulate inside the membrane instead of going out, because the channel is closed. And that accumulation of potassium inside the membrane will cause the membrane excitation. After all, what is membrane excitation? Inside of the membrane turns positive. So membrane excites, and because of that the voltage gated calcium channels open, calcium comes in, and that results in release of insulin finally. So insulin released by the pancreatic beta cell needs this membrane excitation. And coming to the last point of this discussion, most excitable tissue in the body. Let's say if you were to ask, what is the most excitable cell in the body? Which one would you prefer to call as the most excitable? Okay, it has been hypothesized that the hair cell in the labyrinth, the receptor cell, all receptor cells also are excitable cells, by the way. Their membranes excite. This particular cell is in the labyrinth, in the vestibular apparatus and the cochlea. This is called as hair cell, the flask shaped cell. And this is said to be the most excitable cell in the body. Now, why is that? And what is the logic behind it? That much we will discuss, and then we will end this video. Look, for any other cell in the body, the cell is surrounded by ECF, extracellular fluid. And if we say inside of the cell is, let's say, minus 70 millivolts, the RMP, then outside is taken to be 0. I mean, it's the same ECF that surrounds all cells in the body, right? So same composition of that ECF everywhere in the body, it is taken to be 0, and compared to that, inside would be either minus 70 or minus 90 or even minus 35 to 45 in the case of smooth muscle. So that's one point. Look at the hair cell. Hair cell, its inside of the membrane is minus 70 millivolts, fine. But outside is not 0, because hair cells in the vestibular apparatus or hair cell in the labyrinth, cochlea and vestibular apparatus, the hair cells are surrounded by a fluid which is ECF, extracellular fluid, and its name is endolymph. Endolymph is the ECF, it's a part of ECF, and endolymph is not, its voltage is not 0 millivolts, it is plus 80 millivolts. You know why? Because endolymph has excess potassium ions. Now that, why are those potassium ions there? That's a matter of some other video. But for now, please understand that endolymph, although it's an ECF, it has got excess potassium ions. Remember, plasma or ECF does not have potassium elsewhere in the body. Here, this is extracellular fluid, yet having excess potassium ions. That means excess positive charges. Potassium is a cation. So, you can't take it as 0. I mean, point is, the endolymph has the composition of ECF, and there are potassium ions over and above that composition. So, ECF, just like the ECF anywhere else in the body, that same composition in the endolymph, plus, I mean, over and above that composition, there are excess potassium ions or positive charges, I mean to say, and therefore, endolymph potential is not 0, but it's taken to be plus 80 millivolts. So that's called as endolymphatic potential or endocochlear potential. But what is the result of that? The result is, when you look at any other cell, what is the transmembrane electrical gradient? Transmembrane electrical gradient for any other cell in the body. Outside is taken to be 0 and inside is minus 70 or minus 90 or any other RMP. So 0 and minus 70. So across the membrane, the transmembrane voltage is 70 millivolts in this case. Okay, or it could be 90 millivolts if the RMP is minus 90. Look at this cell. Inside is minus 70. But outside is not 0, it's plus 80. So, 80, 0, minus 70. You can understand that the entire difference is 150 millivolts. So transmembrane electrical gradient. See, outside is plus 80 and inside is minus 70. That makes it 150 millivolts difference across the membrane. And that makes hair cell, because this is the highest electrical gradient. You know, the cations like sodium or potassium, they move not only by their own concentration gradients, they also move because of the electrical gradient. Electrochemical gradient drives them. So what my point is that because of this highest transmembrane electrical gradient, a cation like sodium, or in this case potassium, because potassium is more on the outside, so it is going to enter the hair cell through its at the top of the hair cell there are potassium channels. So greater electrochemical gradient will cause a faster movement of cations, and therefore it will take less time to excite. This cell will take lesser time to excite, its chronaxy will be less. So in my view, this is if not most excitable, I may say one of the most excitable cells in the body, the hair cell in the labyrinth. And of course, we need this because, you know, in all the other, let me just tell you the logic and then we will end there. Look, in the case of any other system of the body, there is stimulus and there is response, but the stimulus is intermittent. If you take smell or taste or touch or vibration, all these are intermittent stimuli, and therefore their receptors and the nerves which are going to carry the impulses, they need not be constantly at a very alert situation. In the sense that there is going to be an intermittent stimulus and there is going to be the excitation of the cells related to that stimulus. Olfaction, the olfactory neurons, taste, the taste buds and the taste pathway, the seventh cranial nerve, and the other stimuli. What is the stimulus for the hair cell? Receptor is the hair cell for what? It's for the labyrinth. And hair cell is in the vestibular apparatus, in the cochlea also for the hearing. In the case of this vestibular apparatus, there is a constant stimulus. It's not an intermittent stimulus. It is about the head orientation. So here is a system which is required for the body's balance, maintaining of the body's balance. It is getting a continuous stimulus. And possibly that is the reason why the receptor cell is given to be among the most excitable cells in the body, because it should excite easily, very rapidly, so that there could be a better head orientation, there could be a better body orientation. And of course, this can be seen in the context of evolution and in the context of the fight and flight type of reactions. If you see the enemy and if you have to suddenly change your position, it has to be for the survival instinct, and there you need the most excitable cell so that you can adjust your body positions very, very rapidly based on the stimulus signal sent by the hair cells in the vestibular apparatus. So possibly that makes it among the most, if not most, among the most excitable cells in the body. So that was the topic of chronaxy and the excitability and the other definitions related to it. Thanks.